Here we go. There's my audio. I have audio. You can hear me, I hope. All right. Good morning. It's Monday morning, July 8th, 2024. I am that developer dad. We are continuing on with the Dice Engine component this morning. We're going to expand into being able to roll with advantage or disadvantage. Hey, Akram, how are you? And so to do that, we're going to have to make some pretty serious modifications to the interface and our DiceTray class and the actual Dice Engine component itself. So let's switch views. Click. Here we are. I've got GitHub. I've got the GitHub project up here. I've added a couple of other tasks over here for what's coming next. If we get through adding the ability to roll with advantage and disadvantage this morning, I want to think about creating a console app so that we can run all these tests and then view sort of the distribution of the dice results just very quickly through some sort of console app or whatever, so that we can see that this thing is working in front of our eyes instead of just relying on our thousands and thousands of unit tests that we're able to run. So let's get into the project. And we'll open up in Visual Studio Code. Here we are. Here's our tests. We have our dice tray right here. DiceBag. It doesn't allow us to modify our result. Now, let's change result modifier. I don't like using the same noun for two different concepts. So let's change it to roll adjustment. There we go. And that may or may not have changed over here. No, it hasn't. Let's rename here. Roll adjustment. And we see that we've got a default value of 0. Very good. Save that. And just to make sure we are all still good here, I want to go ahead and run all of our tests. You can see we've got well over 1,000 individual tests that we're going to be able to run here. So let's go ahead and do those. This might take a few seconds, but it shouldn't be too bad. We're quickly counting up. We know that all of our DiceTray tests are working properly, and we've just run about 1,200 tests in a little less than 15 seconds. So that is a-okay. And for each of these tests in here, I think we're running between 1,000 and 10,000 iterations of the roll dice method, just to account for the fact that rolling dice is random. All right, so sometimes when we're sitting around the table, somebody will get a boost or a penalty to their character, and they'll need to roll with advantage or roll with disadvantage. What does that mean? Typically, this applies to making a D20 roll. And when you're rolling with either of these things, you actually roll 2 of the D20s, and then you take the highest if you're rolling with advantage, or you take the lowest if you're rolling with disadvantage. So that adds a little bit of complication to what we are doing. We're going to need, because what we're doing with this is we're rolling the number of dice that we called for, and we're putting those in the dice tray. Now, result isn't a great name for this, so let's rename this symbol to tray. So we count up from 0 And as long as our counter here, which is called roll, is less than the number of dice, and we say less than because we're starting from 0 instead of 1, we're going to create a new random. We're going to grab the next random number out of the random number picker between 1 and the number of sides on our dice. And then we're going to add that to our tray. And then we're going to return the tray. So when we're rolling with advantage, that's a little bit different. We're going to need some sort of modifier to add that behavior. So up here, that's our folder view. Let's go into engines, contracts, and we need something that we can use to define the way we're going to modify our role. So let's add a new file, and let's make it a enum. I'm not that big a fan of enums because if you use them too much, they can really mess with things later. I've seen people use these types of things for legal value lists that should be held in a database or some external resource. And every time we want to add or change something on that list, we have to redeploy all the code, and that's a nightmare. So role modifier. Okay. I am going to say we're going to give this a default value, none. Now, because we're not going to have any kind of, there's no need to map these to a numeric value, we're not going to assign a numeric value. Advantage, disadvantage, and save. Now, our dice tray is going to need to know what kind of modifier we're using on our roll. So let's come over here. And let's change all of these result modifiers to be, how did I name it over on my interface here? Roll adjustment. Okay. Rename this to roll adjustment. There we go. Let's rename this to roll adjustment. There we go. And we are accounting for all of this stuff. Here's our result. Very good. Okay. Now we need to account for our roll modifier. So public, and it is going to be a roll modifier. We're going to say get and a private set, not a set index binder. There we go. And we need to give this a name. All right, and now we need to apply a value to this. So we're going to pass it in. Roll modifier. Roll modifier. Very good. Assign equals roll modifier. There we go. It really doesn't like that, does it? Does not exist in the current context. Let's just change it to modifier. Okay, save. It still really hates that, doesn't it? That's okay. We'll figure it out. Oh, because I spelled it wrong. Okay, and let's rename this back to roll modifier. I thought because I was using the same name for the property as I was using for the used for the type, that it was going to give me grief, but nope, it's because I misspelled it. And now I need to pass roll modifier dot standard. None is what I called it. Okay, let's rerun our tests because we've just modified an object that's in use. We'll just rerun our DiceBag tests. No, we'll rerun everything because we've got our DiceTray, and that's what we've just altered. Looks like we can't build because I've got a compiler error up here. It doesn't like DiceTray. And it's because we haven't applied that modifier here. So our parameter list is starting to get a little long in the tooth over here. So I'm going to do a thing and add a little bit of space so that we can see all of our parameters. Equals roll modifier dot none. Modifier. There we go. Why is it still complaining? There is no argument given that corresponds to the required parameter. You're nuts. Save. Let's try building. That fixed the problem. And DiceBag, we no longer implement that properly. So we have to add this here. Roll modifier. Roll modifier. And we're going to give this a default value. Save it. And if you remember last week when we were setting all of this stuff up for the first time, I said, I don't know how we're going to handle that. Well, we just figured out how we're going to handle it. So I can remove that commented out line of code. And now we've got a missing parameter up here. And I can say optional. And I'm going to copy this. And I'm going to paste it. It's going to say roll modifier. Optional. Alters the number of dice to be rolled and the way the result is calculated. Save. Save all that. Let's rebuild because we should have just fixed up the interface to implementation mismatch. We're good now. Come down to tests. We'll rebuild this. And we'll rerun our test in just a moment. Here we go. Let's run those. I don't expect any negative changes yet because we haven't actually altered any behavior. But we're about to break these tests very, very, very viciously. And then we're going to fix them. So, when the modifier is none, we can just do what we want to do. When the modifier is not none, we need to roll one extra die. If roll modifier is not equal to none, we're going to, oh, excuse me. Take our number of dice, and we need to probably assign it back to that, maybe. So let's see if this is actually the case. And for that, we can add a test. Come into DiceBagTests and collapse this region. We can collapse this region here. Basic roll. I want to change modifier to roll adjustment tests first off. And then finally, let's add region roll modifier tests. And region tests, save that. When we request that the roll be modified, the number of dice to be rolled should be one higher than requested. And let's just put this on two different lines. And we'll just very quickly add a fact, public void, DiceBag tests, modified rolls have one extra Mathrock in the tray. Arrange, whoops, Got to make that a comment. Arrange, act, assert. So let us, we need an iDiceBag. Call that our test object. New DiceBag. And say int number of dice equals 1. Mathrock kind. Rock kind equals, let's roll a d20. Int roll adjustment equals, we're not going to adjust this roll, and modifier equals advantage. And I'm going to rename this. No, let's just leave it at that. Int expected dice in tray equals number of dice plus 1. Because that's the experiment we're doing. I want to bump that in and not collapse. There we go. I like things nice and lined up along edges so that I can see what's what. Now we have to do our experiment. So we're getting back a DiceTray. Tray equals test object dot roll, and let's pass number of dice, rock kind, roll adjustment, and our modifier. And int dice in tray, and we should use a lowercase for this because we're within the local scope, equals tray dot rolls dot length. And that's just a property on the array that we're bringing back. Very good. And now finally, to analyze our results, we're going to assert equal expected dice in tray and dice in tray. Save that. Okay, now let's just rebuild our test class. We'll open up our test lab. Here's this one, and I want to run it. Just that one test. We know all the others are good. And it says it passed. I think it's full of it. Or is it? Let's debug and take a look at some values here. It's doing its thing. Let's set everything up. Our expected dice in tray, we'll step over that. It's just basic math. But we see that we should have 2. And let's actually roll the dice and inspect our tray. So our result is 30. Our roll adjustment is 0. The roll count is 2. Great. Roll modifier. And I forgot that we have a roll count. So let's run. And our dice in tray is tray.rollCount. We can get rid of this rolls.length altogether. And we'll just very quickly rerun this. Just that one test. Okay. And we want to make sure our next thing that we want to be able to take for granted when we roll with advantage. Well, first thing we want to do when we make a modified roll, the result must be between the raw result, because don't forget, we're also dealing with the ability to adjust our roll results. The unadjusted result must be between 1 and the number of sides on our chosen Mathrock. Multiplied by the number of Mathrocks we requested. So, fact, public void, not virtual, but void, DiceBagTest, modified roll, result in correct range. Result is in correct range. So our setup is going to be approximately the same here. Assert DiceTray tray equals test object dot roll, and then we're going to go number of dice, rock kind, roll adjustment, and modifier. Very good. Now, our expectation is that int start of range equals number of dice times the integer version of our rock kind. Int end of range equals, oh, ha, That's that. The starter range is just the number of dice. All right. And we could fairly easily handle a roll adjustment here as well. So why don't we go ahead and do that? And that means the start of the range for number of dice, because we might get a negative roll adjustment passed in, and that roll adjustment might be more than the total number of dice we roll, and we never ever want to see a value less than 0. So what we're going to do is this. If number of dice plus roll adjustment is less than 0, then 0, else we let it happen. Now we could do that, and people will understand what's going on here if they've been writing C for a long, long time and so on. I really don't like the readability of that. I really, really don't like it. So as a compromise, let's see if it'll let us for our ternary if. Oh, stop that. Condition. If true, if false, okay. So we've got our tray. And we need to account for the adjustment here. And yes, I know because order of operations multiplication goes first, but I like to split up the bits and pieces of a mathematical expression so that individual discrete operations are grouped together. So I'm going to put parentheses around that multiplication operation just for readability purposes. And we can get rid of this unadjusted language because we're now accounting for the adjustment. The result must be between 1 and the number of sides to our chosen Mathrock multiplied by the number of Mathrocks we requested. Okay, so our acceptable range is there. And we're going to use a Boolean. Evidence, let's just say evidence, equals tray dot result is greater than or equal to start of range and also tray.result is less than or equal to end of range. And all we're going to do is we're going to say assert.true evidence. Now, something that we've been doing on all of our other ones is setting up a string for our theory statement. Modifying our role adds an extra Mathrock to the tray. We might be able to add our theory statement. Oh no, it doesn't like that. Didn't like that at all. That's all right. We'll fix that stuff up later. No, we won't. Let's keep to our pattern. Bool evidence equals expected dice in tray equals dice in tray. And when we're testing for equality, we have to use that. And we're going to change this to true. And we're going to move this evidence theory statement. All right. And let's add our theory statement up here. String. Theory statement is when modifying the role, our result will ignore, will exclude the extra Mathrock. I don't expect this one to pass. Evidence, theory statement. I don't expect it to pass, but it might, because if we roll 2d20, we need to see the result between 1 and 20. And if we roll 2 5s, or if both dice, when added up, are between 1 and 20, then we don't trigger our failure condition. But we can run it anyway. Doesn't mean it's not a valid test. It just means it's not completely valid. Because if the sum of our dice is greater than 20, then it's absolutely going to fail. Here's our new test. Let's run it. It might fail. It might not. We'll see. Oh, it passed. But we could run it again. We could run it a bunch of times, and we might get a pass, we might get a fail, and sure enough, we got a fail. Because, whoops, I don't know if it'll actually tell us. Yeah, we don't have scope here, but that's great. Our test failed as expected. That means that we have some code to write. So how do we want to account for our actual roll has been modified, and we need to change the way our result is calculated. So we've got our rolls, we've got our roll count, we've got our unadjusted result. That's going to have to change because it's just the sum of all of the rocks. And our result may also have to change. That's right. We've just got some guard code in here to make sure our result will never be less than 0. I think the smart place to put this would be accounting for this in our unadjusted result category. Now, something that we could do is in our rolled Mathrock, we've got a list of these. We should well, we could make this a little bit more sophisticated by adding a property to rolled Mathrock, but that doesn't feel like the right way to do it. I think instead we are going to no, we know that we're modifying our roll, so I think the rolls rocks.count, unadjusted result. First thing we're going to do is we're going to change unadjusted result to use this rolls. Dot sum. I believe we can probably get rid of this. Let's make sure we didn't break our stuff. Let's roll all of the DiceBag tests again. We might have to back that out. Roll them all. Come on. Here we go. Now it's doing all the things. Okay, we still have our one failing test, and that's fine. I don't like the way that impacted our performance here, because converting to an array, like running this link and converting it to an array and all of that stuff doesn't really feel very good. But it is what it is. So here's all the rolls. Before we do that, we're going to have to alter the way this works. So we need a public int array of I'm thinking how we're going to account for this. Let's see. We've got our rocks. We do need to come in here and modify this slightly. Public bool is discarded. Get private set. And instead of setting that up there when we build our Mathrock, we are going to add a method discard set discarded. And in that case, no, let's roll with this. Public void discard. And is discarded equals true. Because we aren't going to choose which one to discard until the very end, until we've got all of our dice rolled. Come back up to DiceTray and add a public method, unadjusted results, add roll. This is going to be an internal method, handle roll modifier. There we go. And I'm going to come in here and say public void reset discard state is discarded equals false. All right, so we'll come into DiceTray. Very first thing we're going to do when we handle our roll modifier is rocks dot for each r dot reset discard state. Then we are going to if roll modifier is not none, rocks equals rocks dot order by r dot value Does it like that? It does not like that. Game tools, dice engine, rock to system.generic list. Oh, dot to list. There we go. We have to cast it back as a list. So we're sorting. And then we are going to say, not if roll. Yeah, you know what? Let's just brute force it. Roll modifier is advantage. Else if roll modifier equals disadvantage. Set the lowest value to discarded. Set the highest value to discarded. And let's see here. We have ordered by the value of the Mathrock in the collection, and that means the lowest value is going to be the first in the list. So rocks dot first dot discard. There we go. And I believe we should be able to say rocks dot last dot discard. And that's just some more dotNet language integrated query stuff. So we've handled our roll modifier. So when we come up here and calculate our unadjusted result, rolls.sum, we can actually add a selector to this. But instead of doing it in a clumsy way, we're going to say, let's get rid of this, roles dot where r dot is discarded equals false. And roles doesn't give us what we want. We need to use, we got to go back to rocks. Dot where, let's put this down here on a new line. And yeah, we can't return an integer from a collection of Mathrocks, but we can return the sum r dot value. There we go. So let's see what this does for us. So our unadjusted results is this. Let's make sure all of this stuff and this stuff is all working. And this is really going to blow up the amount of time our unit tests take. So I'm going to shrink the number of tests per batch. So we're going to go from 10,000 iterations down to 100, just for the purpose of testing, just to make sure I'm not blowing up the amount of time this takes. And I'm going to reduce that by 10. So 2 orders of magnitude. Let's refresh and see what we get. This may or may not work yet. All right, our modified roll is still failing. So let's go to this test and let's step into it. So the start of our range, we'll just drop a breakpoint right there. And we're almost up for our hour this morning. But we'll just step in here and see what we can see on all of this stuff. So we've stopped here. Start of range, we can step over this math. The start of the range should be 1. The end of the range should be 20. Let's roll. And we stepped over our tray. So our result says 31. Why does our result and our unadjusted result say 31? Let's go into the DiceTray. Because we haven't handled our roll modifier. We wrote all that code. And we haven't done a darn thing. So we need to stop. Let's just let it roll out through the end. We got to come over to our DiceTray and incorporate this work into here. So unadjusted result, we need to change this from being a, oh, what am I doing? Here we go. We need to change it from being one of these to one of these. So I'm going to grab this. We're going to copy that to my clipboard. And we're going to turn this into an old-fashioned read-only property. Go ahead and paste. And we want to back this up. Back that up. And we can say return. But before we do that, we have to say handle what's the name of that? Handle roll modifier. It doesn't like that. Does not exist in the current context. Private void still doesn't like it. We are in scope of this, right? Save. Let's try building. Sometimes the IDE's in memory thing, modifier. I spelled it wrong. There we go. So handle roll modifier happens up here in unadjusted result. And you know what? I think we want to have access to, or we want to account for, we want to account for the advantage or disadvantage. When we're looking at the actual roles themselves too. So let's do the same thing. Control X that. We'll add a get. Pop in here, return that, and handle roll modifier. There we go. Now we don't necessarily want to run this method every time we query one of these properties. So I'm going to add a private bool roll is modified. And if roll is modified, we're just going to break, or we're going to return. Now, what happens if we are manually working with a dice tray and adding stuff to it, onesie twosies and stuff like that? What happens if we, well, first off, we have to set this roll as modified. Down here after we've modified it. And this is just a little flag value. But as soon as we so our roll modifier, that'll never change once once our dice tray has been built. Neither will the roll adjustment. However, when we add a roll, roll is modified, becomes false. All right. So, what are some new things that we can think of to test? True exception, okay. Let's run this test one more time. Oh, it's still trying to run stuff because, like a dope, I left the test runner running. Okay, yeah, go away. Is it still trying to run? Oh yeah, it's still trying to run. We're gonna have to restart Visual Studio. Just a moment. Get out of here. Last thing before I call it a morning. I just want to see and make sure that our test is going to be okay. Tools, docs, okay. Waiting for things to open. Excuse me. Let's build our tests. Build. We'll run that one, make sure it's okay. All right, that one worked. Let's run this one. Off it goes. And we're good. All right, this afternoon, we are going to be adding more tests. And I'm just going to add the comments to describe those tests in between now and 1 o'clock this afternoon. We'll implement those, we'll beef them all up, and then we're going to run this thing through its, we're going to put it through its paces when we come back this afternoon. So until then, be good to yourselves, and we'll see you soon. Take care.